21st century man seemingly knows everything. He has attained a state of certainty of his knowledge. What he sees, he believes, and no more. If it's physical, it is real. Nowadays, we operate under these general assumptions, under these irrefutable facts of life. Miracles have no room for the modern man. But we forget that science is rife with miracles. Science is rife with cases of the impossible being possible. The question of reincarnation or rebirth is one such area. Common sense might scoff at the thought that someone can be born again, in another body, at another time. But what if I told you common sense is not always sensible? Sometimes reality is far weirder than we can imagine. This is the story of a boy who claimed to have been murdered and reborn to avenge his death. This is the story of Titu Toran Singh. हेलो नमस्ते डॉक्टर तोरन बोल रहे हैं Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case I have for you today made me question my preconceived notions. It made me question life, death, and rebirth. You know, Aishwarya, this case was one of those moments where I'm sitting with a cup of coffee at midnight, reading some article, and then I spiral into a rabbit hole, which was a caffeine-fueled 72 hours that led me into this mysterious world that I once completely rebuked.
Okay. I'm very intrigued. No, it talks about life, rebirth.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what I feel about those topics, and I'm sure there's some point in this episode you'll ask me what I feel about this.
No, I'm asking you right now, what do you think of reincarnation?
It's one of those things which are so, if you've not experienced it, it's as if you've never had the urge to question whether or not they exist. But asked at gunpoint, obviously, I feel like my rational brain would say there isn't life after death.
And I'm the same. I didn't believe in life after death or reincarnation until this episode. Whatever this case does for you, whether it changes your stance on this particular issue, I cannot guarantee. What I can promise is a whirlwind, a mind-boggling journey into the heartland of India that will at the very least make you think and question and hopefully subscribe. I urge you to hit the subscribe button down there if you're listening on Spotify. Follow us. It's important that
right now.
You guys subscribe. That's how we keep these engines running here at Desi Studios, right?
Such an easy thing to do. Costs you no money, not even too many calories burned. Just scroll to the bottom of your screen, hit that subscribe button right now.
Thank you. Chapter 1. I don't know how I came here. It is December 10th, 1983. All hands are on deck at a military hospital in Agra. A patient has been rushed in an urgent state of emergency. She's pregnant in her third trimester and her odds of survival and that of her child are dubious. Shanti Devi has already given birth to 5 children before. She's not new to this business, but this 6th one is proving to be a menace. Her family hails from a small village called Bard, 14 kilometers outside Agra. In their village, childbirth is facilitated by a midwife and other women in the community. But a week before she is set to deliver this child, her health rapidly deteriorates and she is forced to be admitted to the military hospital in the city. Back in 1983, military hospitals were the few medical institutions where you could get cheap but good medical attention. But for that, you had to be related to somebody in the army. Shanti Devi's husband, Mahavir Singh, he was not an army man. He was a chemistry teacher at the Hubbulal Inter College in Agra. He taught acid, bases, and the periodic tables to 11th and 12th graders, not military strategy or warfare. But desperate times call for desperate measures. When Mahavir saw the state his wife was in, virtually at the cusp of death, and along with her 6th child, he rushed her to the military hospital under the alias of a friend who was in the army. It is his army friend's name that got his wife the treatment she needed. 7 days after being admitted, on December 10th, 1983, Mahavir's sixth child was born, against all odds. Toran Singh. Shanti lovingly called him Titu. The child bore 2 clear birth marks on his forehead, one on the right temple and the other behind his left ear. The right side of the skull also had a slight indentation, but nothing that worried the doctors. It was a slight structural deformity. Other than that, the family couldn't be happier. Their third and youngest son was a healthy baby. Titu, the family thought, was a statistical anomaly. Except they had no idea just how anomalous, just how extraordinary this baby boy was. His birth wasn't the only miracle, you see. Titu himself was one. Mahavir, his wife Shanti, his 3 daughters and now 3 sons together lived in a traditional one-story village home. The family owned farmland that made them a sizable income, but Mahavir commuted daily to Agra to teach chemistry as well. His oldest son was Ashok Kumar, 13 years old at the time Titu was born. His other son, Raj Kumar, was 10. He also had 3 daughters, Asha, who is 8, Kunta, who is 6, and Gullo, who is 2. This big family was no different than the other 1,000 residents of the village bar. Household chores and farm work was divided equally among the members. Their lives were going per usual until 1985, when Titu began speaking his first words. The problem was that at the age of 18 months, Titu wasn't murmuring mama or dada. He was speaking full sentences. Sentences like, I'm from Agra. I don't know how I came here. Chapter 2. Radio Silence.
2.5 साल की उम्र में ये बालक ये बताता था कि मेरी माँ का नाम राजकुमारी है, मेरी बहू का नाम उमा है, मेरे पापाजी का नाम चंदा भारती है। तो हम लोग इस पे शक करते थे। हम पूछते थे कि हम कौन हैं, तो ये बताता था कि हम तुम्हारे घर के नहीं हैं।
Quote, tell my grandfather to look after my children and my wife. I'm having my meals here and I'm worried about them. These were the words of an 18-month-old infant. Shanti was shocked. What is my son saying? How is my son even talking? Children? A wife? These words were incongruent to a child that is still suckling on his mom's milk. His statements are so preposterous that for a while the family ignores them.
Aram, that's absolutely absurd to think that my first word was light and not even the full word light, but it. And this kid is talking about a wife and children.
Ashwarya, at 18 months, I used to call water Gaga.
Tell us your first words in the comments below, because I'm sure they weren't anything like...
Yeah.
And what are you even supposed to do? Like...
There's nothing to do. For the parents, there's nothing to do. And the Shanti Devi and Mahavir had to act oblivious, as if it's normal their kid is making absurd remarks. But this was just the start. It only gets weirder from here. It only gets tougher to ignore. Let me read some of the statements this kid was making. Quote, Mummy, please don't go out in these clothes. I feel embarrassed by them. My wife Uma had beautiful saris. On another occasion, he would say, quote, your house is dirty. I will not stay. My house is very big. My sister-in-laws are educated. My brothers have beautiful shirts which you have not seen. You see, when this kid was expected to walk or go on a bus, he would say, quote, I used to go by car. I will not go on foot or on a bus. End quote. Here's a clip of Shanti Devi recounting some of Titu's otherworldly statements.
मैं गंदी मैं धोती पैर की बाहर साड़ी है यहाँ तक है तुम मम्मी मेरी उम्र तो 2,000 की साड़ी पहनती है, तुम गंदी धोती से बाहर मत जाओ करो। हम भगवान ज्यादा हैं, तुम मम्मी गरीब हो, हमें ना अच्छा लगा तू कहो कि तो कातन को मकान में यहाँ दिल ना लगा तू बेटा जाए मार दिन तक जे वाला तो जो कि तुम तो आगे जाओ मैं ना ठीक भैया तू आगे जाओ बता हमारी जान न पहचान कहाँ जाओ आगे कहना मैं ना रहे तो आई झट झोला अपने छोटे छोटे कपड़ा भरे और झट चल लें तुझे.
Now 3 years old, the boy seemed to have become a man while still in a toddler's body. He kept mentioning of a different life, a different family, a different Titu. Shanti says that at one point he packed all his clothes into a bag and threatened to leave for Agra to find his family. But children have imaginary friends. Perhaps Titu had an imaginary life. Perhaps he pieced together bits of news and gossip to weave an elaborate narrative. But then his claims began becoming more specific. On one family trip to Agra, Titu had a meltdown. While they were on their way to a wedding, Titu kept screeching, quote, "I have a shop in Sadar Bazaar. I have a shop in Sadar Bazaar." Again, the family paid no attention. Titu grew more agitated. Every day he would cry more often and continue saying things that were out of place. He began referring to his own biological parents as Gullo's mother or father while calling out to them. He refused to acknowledge them as his own. He urged them to let him go see my brother Raja Babu and my sister Sushila. By this point, he had named several so-called imaginary relatives. He claimed his wife was Uma, his brother was Raja Babu, and his sister was Sushila. He lamented that his biological father, Mahavir, visited Agra daily to teach chemistry, but not once brought back news of Titu's actual family. Things came to a boil in April 1987, when Titu was almost 4 years old. His tantrums had doubled. His dad left again for Agra without Titu. The child sobbed uncontrollably. This time, he revealed to his eldest brother, Ashok Kumar, about his shop in Agra. Sitting in his lap, he said, quote, "My father doesn't take me to Agra. Can you take me there? I have a shop of transistor radios and I was a big smuggler and gunda. I am the owner of Suresh Radio. I am Suresh." End quote. To put this matter to rest once and for all, the family decided to send their eldest son, 17-year-old Ashok, to Agra. Once Titu's claims are irrefutably rebuked and disproven, the family thought their youngest son would be ridden of his fantasies. Ashok, along with a friend, headed to Sadar Bazaar in Agra to look for a shop named Suresh Radio.
मेरे घर वालों ने ये फैसला किया कि मैं आगरा जाकर पता करूं कि जो मेरा छोटा भाई टीटू बोलता है वो सच है कि नहीं। सुरेश रेडियो की दुकान मुझे वहाँ मिल गई और वो वाकई एक विधवा उमा की थी जिसके पति का कुछ साल पहले खून हो गया था।
Ashok couldn't believe it. He was standing outside a shop where the banner read Suresh Radio, authorized dealer Bush, Murphy, Cosmic and Western. This was a real radio shop. Trepidly, he walked in. Sitting on the counter was a woman attending to the customers. Ashok said, "I am looking for Suresh." The woman at the counter replied, quote, "Suresh died 3 years ago. I'm his wife Uma. How can I help you?" There was radio silence.
What? I don't even know what to think. I don't even know what to say. I have chills. That is so creepy.
While researching this case, I wondered if Titu is still alive. I wondered if the boy you see in the videos was a man now. And where was this man? Where was Titu Toran Singh? After hours of research, calling thousands of people who were somehow related to Toran Singh, I got a number. I didn't know if it was real, but I just had to call. I just had to know. And so I did. The line kept ringing and ringing and ringing, and I thought this was a hoax. But then suddenly, I was about to hang up at this point. I was like, not happening. Hello. नमस्ते, डॉक्टर तोरन बोल रहे हैं? Chapter 3. Smuggled into the Afterlife. डॉक्टर तोरन सिंह, आपके केस को रिसर्च करने में मैंने बहुत घंटे गुजारे और मैंने 4 साल के टीटू की बहुत वीडियोस देखी हैं. अब मेरे सामने 40 साल का टीटू बैठा है ना, तो थोड़ा अजीब महसूस होता है. बट थैंक यू फॉर लेटिंग अस हैव दिस कॉन्वर्सेशन सर. मेरा पहला क्वेश्चन आपसे ये है, आपकी पहली मेमोरी क्या है? आपको याद है फर्स्ट मेमोरी यू हैव?
मेरे को अपने पुनर्जन्म के बारे में सारी चीज़ें याद हैं.
Summer in Agra is hot. Temperatures reach 45 degrees Celsius. But that doesn't stop hordes of tourists from rampaging the city just to get a glimpse of the Taj Mahal. The city is packed, which means if you have a retail shop nearby, business is booming. And so it was for 30-year-old Suresh Verma, proud and notorious owner of Suresh Radios. His shop was located 4 kilometers away from the Taj Mahal in the city center, Sadar Bazaar. Suresh's shop had all kinds of radio gizmos and gadgets. Transistors, speakers, VCRs, you name it. The latest imported device could be found at Suresh's shop. In 1983, India wasn't yet a liberalized economy. Getting your hands on imported tech was like touching gold. You were the talk of the town if you paraded your newly acquired Walkman. That was the allure of Suresh Radio. But even for a businessman, getting hands on foreign equipment wasn't a straightforward ordeal, and neither was Suresh a straightforward man. He had earned a notoriety for being a smuggler. He bought and sold on the black market and made a decent buck for him and his family. Suresh was born to Chanda Babu Bharti, who was a professor, and Barfi Devi Singh, his mother. He was married to Uma Verma and had 2 sons, Sachin and Amit. The couple lovingly called them Monu and Tonu. His family lived in a modern 3-story house fitted with TV, coolers, a spanking white Fiat car, and whatever was the latest amenity at the time. These luxuries, though, came at a cost. Suresh boisterously referred to himself as a gunda, a goon, a man who got what he wanted come hell or high water. His father Chanda Babu recounts how in 1975, 8 hitmen had kidnapped Suresh in a car and held him hostage. But even 8 men weren't enough to keep this goon at bay. He beat the man closest to him, jumped out of the car into the nearby river, and swam to safety. Such was Suresh. A brazen Suresh drove his white Fiat around Agra. He loved his car. It symbolized power and money, both qualities he craved. On one occasion in 1982, his car was stolen by 2 thieves. He retrieved the car himself by attacking the goons. Bullets were fired, but he escaped unscathed. However, this would be the last time he would evade gunfire successfully. Like I said, summer was in full bloom, and so was Suresh Radio Shop. It was August 28, 1983. Uma Verma, Suresh's wife, was doing household chores in the evening. She was expecting her husband any moment now. She heard his Fiat pull into the driveway, and she heard him honk the car twice. But then out of nowhere, a loud bang followed. For a second, she thought the tire had burst. She rushed out to check and saw 2 men running away.
तो वहाँ कोठी के पास ही पहुंचे थे, 2-3 हॉर्न दिए थे, उसमें हम निकल के आए और भी आदमी थे, बल्कि वो निकल के आए जब तक मतलब काफी जोर से आवाज आई थी। और उस आवाज में सबने कहा कि सुरेश की गाड़ी की स्टेपनी खराब हो गई है, मगर जब गोलियों की आवाज थी, बाहर निकल के देखा तो मैंने कहा अंदर आई है, तो आए नहीं। मैंने वो सोचा कि इस कंडीशन में कभी आते भी नहीं है। मैं गाड़ी के पास गई और मैंने ऐसा लगा तो हाथ पकड़ के, तो मेरी सीधी चीख निकल गई, किसी ने गोली मारी है।
Suresh Verma had been shot dead in daylight. A bullet had gone straight through his head, entering at the right temple and leaving from behind his left ear. 3 months later, on 10th December 1983, in the city of Taj Mahal, a baby boy was born. This boy had a birthmark on the right side of his forehead and another behind his left ear. Sir, आपको सुरेश के मर्डर के बारे में क्या याद है? आपको जब
मेरे को सुरेश के मर्डर के बारे में कुछ भी याद नहीं है। मेरे को सिर्फ इतना याद था कि मैं दुकान बंद करके और अपनी फिएट वाइट कलर की जो थी वो लेके सागंज में जो मेरी कोठी थी उस पे जा रहा हूँ। मेरे से 2 लोग थे, वो लोग, एक ने नमस्ते की, दूसरे ने मेरे को गोली मार दी। तो मैंने लेकिन वहाँ पहुँचने पे उनसे पूछा कि भाई आप किस लिए यहाँ पे, तो उन्होंने कहा नहीं कुछ नहीं, आपसे मिलने आए थे। तो एक ने उन्होंने नमस्ते किया, तब तक उन्होंने गोली मार दी।
क्यों मारी थी सर?
वो वैसे ही, अब उनका कुछ रिवेंज रहा हो या जैसे भी रहा हो, वैसे उस जमाने में मैं उन लोग के साथ स्मगलिंग करता था। ठीक। और दूसरा उनका जो भी रीजन रहा हो।
क्या रीजन था सर?
रीजन आपको बताया था मैंने कल परसों।
नहीं बताया था सर, आपने कहा था वेट करना, जब आओगे तब बताएंगे।
नहीं, वो चक्कर क्या था, देखिए उसको मैं इस पे क्या, देखिए अभी मैं इसमें हूँ, आप भले रिकॉर्ड कर लीजिए, अभी मैं इसमें हूँ। अब मैं ये सारी चीजें बोलूँ, उनके लिए प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट हो, तो उससे कोई तात्पर्य निकलता नहीं। वो अपना पीसफुली लाइफ हैप्पीली लिव।
चलिए सर, आप ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड बाद में जब माइक बंद होगा तब मुझे बता दीजिएगा। Chapter 4 Twist, Trysts and Tests।
जिम मेरा फोटो है सुरेश का, पहले का यहाँ जे आपको है तो कुछ जगह उन्हीं की जगह
यही है साहब, उसे अपनी याद है। ले
क्या भाई, मम्मी को है और जी उमा को है।
Ashok couldn't believe what he was seeing, and Uma couldn't believe what he was telling her. Everything Titu had been rambling about, a radio shop, a wife named Uma, kids named Sonu and Tonu, his Fiat, it all checked out. Uma, on the other hand, was taken aback that this stranger knew intimate details about her life.
अजीब सा लगा ही मेरे को. फिर मैंने कहा लगा के चलो देखें बातें क्या हुई, कैसे हुई, क्या करना है, चलना है, सोचते रहे. फिर घर गई मैं शाम को. मैंने फिर पेरेंट्स लोगों से कहा कैसे ऐसे बात है. बोले कि चलो सुबह ही चलते हैं. सुबह 7 बजे गई वहाँ.
Aryan, is there at all a possibility that this family is lying? That's the only thing that I can come up with.
That's what I thought, that this family is lying. But lying. Which family is lying?
That's true. Can both be lying?
Can both be lying? Well,
no, that's
I also thought
unlikely.
that. I also thought, is there a possibility of but these families didn't know each other.
No, what if only Titu's family is lying? Has anyone ever got in touch with Suresh's family? Have they been interviewed? Maybe it's just a figment of Titu's family's imagination, this whole story. Is that possible?
As you're about to find out, these two families ended up meeting. The very next day, Uma and her in-laws embark to the village of Bard. When they get to the village, locals tell them that there is no Titu Singh or Mahavir Singh here. For a second, they thought they were fooled and they had fallen prey to some scam. Only to be informed by the residents that there are 2 villages named Bard, one near Mathura, where they were right now, and one near Agra. Realizing their mistake, the family changes course and heads back. Aishwarya, this is an important detail because it shows you that Uma's family, Suresh's family, didn't know Titu's family because clearly they went to the wrong village. So
sure.
This family doesn't know of them. The claim can be, so Titu's family might know of this and they came up with it, right?
Yes. In my mind, if there is a family faking it, it's
Titu's family.
Right.
Correct. And what do you think is in it for them?
Just a shot at fame. It's not the first time that anyone's created absurd stories. Not to this degree, obviously, but people create absurd stories all the time to be on the news, to be in the limelight.
Correct.
Obviously, they're not trying to do that. They're not trying to be on the news. They're not trying any of that.
Yeah.
But it's the only thing I can think of.
And all these theories were prodded and we'll get into them. Finally, the Vermas reach Mahavir Singh's house. Titu is sitting in a corner doing whatever a 4-year-old does, but he senses a commotion happening over his shoulder. When he heads towards the chaos, his eyes light up. Uma, he shouts at the first glance. Uma cannot believe it. This kid she has never met before in her life knows her name. Titu runs towards her and embraces them. He's overcome with joy to see his family. He immediately recognizes his, quote, Papaji, Mataji and siblings who have come as well.
Uma aayi, Papaji aaye, Mataji aayi, sab aaye.
Uma and her family are still in disbelief, trying to rationalize this. Much like Aishwarya, they are also thinking Titu's family has probably faked this all. To convince her, Titu tells her of a trip she made with Suresh and their kids to Dholpur. He even told her he had bought them chaat and kulfi. A shell-shocked Uma sat there, staring into Titu's eyes, slowly coming to the realization that it was in fact her late husband.
आज की डेट में देखिए, मैं 40-41 साल मेरी एज है, लेकिन मैं खुद आश्चर्यचकित रहता है कि मैंने ऐसी चीज़ें वहाँ डिस्क्लोज की, ये किया, क्योंकि बहुत सारी, क्योंकि ऐसे ही कोई नहीं मान सकता. मैं आपसे मिलूँ, मैं बोलूँ मैं उसका कौन बिलीव कर लेगा. लेकिन वाइफ ने भी मेरे ऐसे सवाल पूछे कि जो मेरे और उसके अलावा कोई जानता ही नहीं था. बहुत सारी चीजें थी.
एक कोई सवाल बताइए आपके और आपके वाइफ के बीच में.
जो उन्होंने बोला कि आप खत्म हुए तो उससे पहले हम 1 दिन पहले कहाँ गए थे. हम धौलपुर मेले में गए थे, आपने कार के बोनट पे बैठ के जलेबी खाई थी. तो इतना
स्पेसिफिक. Aishwarya, how do you explain Titu knowing of a trip that her and Suresh had, what he bought the kids on that trip? How do you think if they were faking it, which is a plausible theory, how would they know all of this?
I don't know. Uma's also lying.
Everybody's lying.
Everybody's lying. Yeah. Obviously, that many people lying who aren't related to each other. But in my mind, what's more likely? That people are lying or that
they're reincarnated?
They're reincarnated.
That's
and
what
this
I
kid
thought.
Is back and he's 4 years old looking at his wife and embracing her.
I know. But I'll get into more evidence. This might be enough evidence for Uma, but it wasn't enough evidence for Aishwarya or Uma's relatives. Not everybody is convinced. So that day was filled with traps and tests set up for Titu. This 4-year-old would now spend the next 24 hours being tested at every turn over every small detail of his past life. This was the moment where, for the first time ever, Titu was asked how he had died.
बलबीर ने गोली मारी, तुम क्या कर रहे थे? बता जल्दी बता.
गए तो खोल नहीं पाई, रानी उठा हुआ था गए, ऐसा कोने खाली मारे हुए।
Quote, while I was near my house, 3 people stopped me. One shot me and then they ran off. I did not see their faces. They came from the left side and after shooting, ran away. End quote. Titu was spot on. As he accompanied the Vermas back to their car, he was annoyed that this wasn't his car. This is not my car. My car was white. Again, he was right. In fact, this 4-year-old child who had been raised with cows and a thatched roof got into the car, messed around with the tape recorder, hit the pedal, shifted the gear and drove the car around. This was Titu's first time in a car, but it was as if a proud Suresh was driving his Fiat around. But the Vermas needed more convincing. Later in the afternoon, Suresh's 2 sisters came to visit Titu. Sushila Jiji. He immediately recognized her. When asked who the elder one was, Titu promptly said neither. This again was a trap to test Titu. Actually, Suresh's older sister Munni Rani was not there, but the kid saw right through it. Next was to take Titu to Suresh Radio, his former business. But they tried fooling him once again by taking Titu to Suresh's brother's radio shop to see if he would notice the difference. And boy, did he. He was mad. Titu insisted that this wasn't his shop. His was nearby, about 100 yards from where they were. When they finally entered the actual Suresh Radio, his actual shop, his first enraged reaction was, quote, "This showcase was not here. Who got it constructed?" Uma held her breath. She got that showcase built after Suresh had died. The boy remembered every inch of his store where he conducted illicit trade. He proceeded to call out to the manager by name and even pointed to the drawer where Uma kept her cash. Isn't that mind-blowing, Ishwarya?
It is, Aryan, but in my mind in this case, it's the nitty-gritties that will make or break the story.
100%.
So who is recounting this story? Whose perspective on that day is this? Is this Uma's perspective, multiple people's perspectives? Who's recounting these details?
We have video evidence, as we've seen, of all the family members talking about it, right? And the people that have conducted the study, as you're going to find out, are professors from the University of Virginia. This is a massively well-documented case that has not only video evidence that you've been seeing, it has research papers written on it, and one of the primary reasons why we have so much evidence is because of the murder of Suresh, which got the police involved, which kept everything documented in the hospital, in the police station.
Sure.
These are all primary documents. Test after test, Titu triumphed. They finally took him to Chanda Bharti's home, Suresh's father. He latched on to Papaji, displaying a deep affection for a man he had met 10 hours ago. But it seemed like he had known him forever.
ये सोचा कि 80% अपना बच्चा है ये और 20% जरा सकता मुझे उसके ऊपर जब भी मेरी तबीयत 2-4 बार मेरे घर पर भी मेरे पास आया वो और चिपट गया मुझसे और मुझे छोड़कर नहीं जाता कहीं पर भी बड़ी मुश्किल से मैं अपना उसको पीछे छुड़ाता हूँ.
Here, Titu's final test awaited him. If he passes this, the family would once and for all accept it was their very own Suresh who had been reborn. In Chanda Bharti's house were several kids. They had been gathered around to confuse Titu because in the group were also Monu and Tonu, Suresh's real children. The Vermas were certain he'd fail to recognize them. When Titu entered, he looked around, raised his eyebrow, and in his cold, callous and haughty manner looked straight at Monu, his elder son, and remarked, "Why did you not say namaste to me?" After his twists, trysts and tests, Titu was finally home. Chapter 5, Department of Perceptual Studies. In 1957, a new chairman was elected for the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at the University of Virginia, a man named Ian Stevenson. Professor Stevenson had up to that point pioneered topics such as neuroplasticity in children, effects of psychedelics, and other areas of psychoanalysis. His massive body of work had earned him the prestigious position at the head of this department at one of America's most elite universities. He had often been at odds with his peers for being the contrarian, but was a well-respected scholar. The year after being elected chairman, in 1958, the American Society for Psychical Research announced a contest for the best essay on, quote, the topic of paranormal mental phenomena and their relationship to the problem of survival of the human personality after bodily death. Essentially, an essay on the afterlife. Ian felt gravitated. He had always been puzzled by the question of reincarnation. He always felt scholars discarded the possibility without ever prodding it. In his years of academic study, he had come across many cases of reported reincarnation that had never been further investigated for the risk of being ostracized by the academic community. Now that he was the chairman of the department, he feared no one. The man was the head of the academic community for all intents and purposes, so he himself prodded the question of human personality after bodily death. He analyzed 44 cases of reincarnations reported in newspapers and magazines and published his findings in 1960. He said, quote, "These 44 cases, when you put them together, it just seemed inescapable to me that there must be something there. I couldn't see how they could all be faked or they could all be deception." One essay is what it took to send this man down a spiral that would consume him entirely for the rest of his life. Through the years, Ian began documenting cases of reincarnation around the world, in India, Ceylon, Thailand, you name it. The more he looked, the more cases he found. Ian was very particular about ensuring these cases were real, unmarred by deceit or imagination. He came up with elaborate methodologies to parse out the fake cases. These methods eventually came to be known as the Stevenson methods. Chester Charlson, the man who invented Xerox, began funding Ian's research. His first stop was India. Within 4 weeks of being here, he had stumbled upon 25 cases. Turns out reincarnation was far more common than he had thought. His first full publication came out in 1966, titled 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. The book was written with utmost care to academic rigor. Jim Tucker, now director of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, writes, quote, "The cases in it were ones for which Ian had made painstaking efforts to determine exactly what the various children had said and to verify how well the children's statements matched the lives of the individuals they were thought to remember. The book consisted of detailed case reports that included lists of every person Ian had interviewed, along with lengthy tables in which each statement the child had made about a previous life was listed, along with the informant for that statement and the person or persons who verified that it was actually correct and of the deceased individual. Ian presented the cases in an objective, even-handed manner, discussing their weaknesses as well as their strengths." End quote. The reason I'm going to great lengths to give you all a history lesson is to prove that reincarnation isn't wacko voodoo stuff. Perhaps I am projecting, because before researching this case, I actually thought it was. I didn't believe in reincarnations. Hell, I didn't think that there was any intellectual value in pursuing that question. And here I am, covering it on my podcast now. See, it's not that I believe in reincarnation all of a sudden. Let me quote to you what the American Journal of Psychiatry wrote about Ian's book. It nicely captures my personal belief. Quote, "In Dr. Stevenson's book, there were cases recorded in such full detail as to persuade the open mind that reincarnation is a tenable hypothesis to explain them." A tenable hypothesis, not a guaranteed one.
Are people something more than a combination of genes and the family environment? Just think of the way the average Western parent regards his or her child. It's exactly the same as one regards an automobile that's come off a factory line. There was nothing before these bolts and bits and pieces of the car were assembled and painted. And that is the standard view that Western parents have of their children. They make the child. The attitude is quite different in countries where there's a belief in reincarnation. There is this third component of some existence before the conception of the current body, as they would see the matter. So that the child bears some responsibility for what he does, says, and how he develops.
Through the decades, Ian furnished his findings and found countless more cases of children having memories of a previous life. And I'm not the only one enraptured by Ian's work. Many were. One of whom was a budding professor named Dr. Antonia Mills. Ian was particular about getting other professors to replicate his methodologies to ensure that his biases were weeded out. He wanted to bulletproof his findings. Of one of the many collaborators he invited, one was Dr. Mills, a seasoned researcher from Harvard. In August 1987, she got a call inviting her to fly down to India where there were 10 cases of reincarnation that were worth investigating. One of them was of a boy from Agra named Titu Toran Singh. She packed her bags and boarded the 16-hour plane ride to New Delhi. Chapter 6. Eighth Wonder of the World. White people come to Agra for one reason and one reason only, the seventh wonder of the world, the Taj Mahal as they like to call it, but not Professor Antonia Mills. She was on the hunt for the eighth wonder, a boy who claims to have been reborn to avenge his murder. Antonia met Titu in a sprawling home in Bar. She sat down with him, his dad, his mom, his siblings, and one by one methodically asked questions to poke and catalogue his case. She also met Suresh's family, Uma, her kids, and Suresh's parents. It was now 1987. It had been a year since the families realized that Titu was not an ordinary kid. But this was the first time someone was studying their story and verifying it. Antonia talks about how she went thinking these cases would all be hoaxes, that her trip to India would not really bear any fruit. She was certain there would be normal explanations underpinning this seemingly paranormal occurrence. As a psychologist, she wanted to find a natural reason. As a woman of science, she wanted to disprove the theory of reincarnation. But what followed in the years, in the 5 weeks she spent in India between 1987 and 1988, changed her life forever. The first pillar of proof were testimonies of Titu, the claims he made. Yes, Titu's story was corroborated by Suresh's family, but Dr. Mill couldn't take them on their word. She had to see this for herself. So she took Titu to Suresh's shop again to try and find out more. To try, like Suresh's family had in the past, set up traps to poke holes in his memory. In front of Dr. Mills, documented in the study Aishwarya, Mahesh, one of Suresh's brother, asked Titu about a wedding. Mahesh was referring to his own wedding. He asked Titu where it took place, whether it was Agra or Mathura or Kanpur, which are other cities in Uttar Pradesh. Kanpur, Titu quipped at his former brother. Kanpur it was. Antonia was shocked. When asked how they went to the wedding, Titu responded, "In my car." Right again. If you read Antonia's research logs, you will find many such instances where she first-hand encountered and documented. In one entry, she describes how Titu behaved when he entered Suresh Radio shop in front of her. Quote, "He went swiftly by himself to the second floor of the shop and commended the workman." This was the first time Titu had gone upstairs. He did so spontaneously, without seeing anyone else do so, as if he knew what he was doing. The existence of a second floor was not obvious. The testimonies are great, but they merely form one pillar of the evidence Ian Stevenson's methodologies encompassed. The Stevenson methodology of studying cases of reported reincarnation required many more layers of evidence to ensure veracity, to ensure we separate fact from fiction, fact from fantasy. The most powerful piece of evidence is forensic evidence. In cases of reincarnation, Dr. Ian's research revealed the prevalence of birthmarks and their relevance. Birthmarks are essentially skin abnormalities that are present on a person's body from the time they were born. These can take the forms of pigmented birthmarks, where a certain patch of skin has varying melanin, leading to brighter or darker spots. There also exist vascular birthmarks, which have to do with abnormal growth of blood vessels. But why we have these weird marks right from birth is still a big unknown in the scientific community. Scientists aren't sure why they happen. But Ian Stevenson reasoned it had something to do with your previous life. Quote, "Almost nothing is known about why pigmented birthmarks occur in particular locations of the skin. About 35% of children who claim to remember previous lives have birthmarks that they attribute to wounds on a person whose life they remember. In many cases that Ian studied, the birthmark was somehow related to how the individual had died in their previous life."
Boy is here. He's now a youth of 14, I think. He's with my interpreter and his father. The next slide shows the birthmark he had. Now this is an area of decreased pigmentation, which is not uncommon among these cases. And I got an autopsy report in this case, and I persuaded the pathologist to help me find the postmortem report to draw circles of the wounds. It was a shotgun killing, and the next slide shows.
Professor Stevenson has studied hundreds of birthmarks and birth defects in children who claim previous lives.
I'm particularly interested in a collection we have about 15 cases where there are two birthmarks corresponding to bullet wounds of entry and exit. And forensic pathologists know that nearly always if you shoot somebody, the bullet wound of entry is small and round, and the bullet wound of exit is large and irregular in shape. And that's the way our birthmarks, and about half of these cases, they correspond exactly that way.
Ishwara, do you have any birthmarks?
No, none that I know of. I've just been thinking about that.
Yeah.
This is my first life, I guess.
Yeah, no, I have one on my tummy. I don't know if I was stabbed or what. But okay. I have a couple of cases for you that were in Ian's book. Mm-hmm. This is the autopsy of a man that was shot dead. Okay. From close range with a shotgun.
So these are bullet wounds.
These are, it's like a shotgun, there's a splatter wound. So these are his wounds. Few months later, a boy was born that was reporting about dying from a shotgun wound, etc., etc. You remember the exact name of this person and whatnot.
Sure.
And look at his birthmark.
No way.
Exactly the same splatter pattern.
That's crazy.
Yeah. In fact, while researching this case, Aishwarya, this might be an urban legend, but they say military people tend to have more birthmarks on their chest and sort of like third nipples or fourth nipples, that sort of a thing, than the average population, which, using Ian's logic, could be that in their previous births also they were army men died by bullets. But this is unbelievable, isn't it?
That's crazy.
That's forensic evidence. That's not somebody making something up.
Oh my God. That's really scary. So in that case, we know that the kid who died was referring to the guy in the autopsy?
Yeah. Same name, same story, told everything. So that is corroborating testimony with actual
fact.
biology,
With
fact.
Right.
This is what Antonia was looking for in Titu. Birthmarks. And if you remember, Titu was indeed marked for life. He had two birthmarks, both on his head. One round one on his right temple and a few splattered marks on his left. Antonia joined the dots quite literally when she found out how Suresh had died. Bullet wounds straight through his head. But she couldn't just take Uma's word for this, just like Aishwarya wouldn't. She needed hard evidence that Suresh had indeed been killed and how that had been. The police verified that Suresh was shot, but to get his autopsy, Antonia visited the hospital where Suresh had been rushed in 1983, 4 years after he had been killed. There, after hours spent digging into the dusty archive of a hospital, hours of looking through papers since nothing was electronic back then, she found it. She found Suresh's autopsy. It clearly states that the victim had died of a bullet wound that entered from his right temple and exited from the left, splattering that side of his head. In his research paper published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Ian wrote, quote, in 43 of 49 cases in which a medical document, usually a post-mortem report, was obtained, it confirmed the correspondence between wounds and birthmarks. There is little evidence that parents and other informants imposed a false identity on the child in order to explain the child's birthmark. Some paranormal process seems to be required to account for at least some of the details of these cases, including the birthmarks. Now Antonia knew this is what was happening in Titu's case. The major piece of forensic evidence confirmed this was a case of reincarnation. But this wasn't the only evidence Antonia gathered. She also documented a stark similarity between the personalities of Suresh and Titu. Everyone described the late 30-year-old smuggler as haughty and short-tempered. Titu, even as a child, was the same. In her research logs, Antonia noted, quote, the Vermas note the similarity of temperament of Titu and Suresh. Both are highly active, intrepid and hot-tempered individuals. I observed these qualities in Titu, who beat a boy as hard as he could with a sugarcane frond because he was annoyed at the crowd that had gathered when I wanted to photograph him. When we took Titu to Suresh Radio, Titu gave a stool inside the shop a resounding smack as he entered, a very macho gesture. Later that day, Titu grew furious when it was time for him and his father to leave. Titu threw something at his father and tried to pull away from his grip as hard as he could. Another day at his home, Titu told the bangle seller whom his mother had called to fit bangles on my wrist, quote, I will shoot you if you charge them. I will kick you out of the courtyard. End quote. Are you more open-minded about reincarnations than you were at the beginning?
Definitely more curious. Like I said, this was a thing I hadn't even had the chance or reason to ever think about. I feel like now I do have a reason to think about it.
But Aishwarya, as I guess modern people, we wanna question this. We wanna poke holes in this. So let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say they lied. Let's say there is some natural explanation for this.
Yeah.
I will throw a few theories. You let me know what you think.
Go for it.
One is, so this is something Dr. Antonia also thought would have been the case, was caste conversion. There was this theory that people would report having life before so that they could actually change their caste and become somebody of a higher caste, right? Because they could claim I was somebody a higher caste.
Sure.
It was a way to break the caste cycle that is...
How interesting.
Right. And this is what Antonia thought was the case. She thought it's going to be a scam like this. Both Suresh and Titu belong to the same Vaishya class. So caste is out of the question.
Sure.
Right? Okay, the other is, and this is what stands out to me, Titu's family made it up and they made it up to get Suresh's property perhaps, or get money out of this, right?
Interesting.
Right, because there could be a claim, Titu saying, that's all mine.
But in that case, to me, then Suresh's family has no reason to lie, right?
Suresh's family doesn't have a reason to lie.
They, if anything, have a reason to rebuke this theory.
100%. Also, more than that, Titu's family never wanted any of the land. In fact, one of the issue they had raised to the media was, we are worried that Titu will start making these claims when he grows up, asking for Suresh's land. We don't want it.
हम तो सर हैरान हैं इसलिए कि ये अपने को नहीं बदला और जब मान लो बड़ा हो गया तो उसके बाद में हम लोगों से संबंध ही बिल्कुल खत्म कर देगा. बहुत बड़ा ममता आती है ना कि अपना बालक होते हुए ये सारी कहानी, जबकि हम वैज्ञानिक युग के होते हुए इस बात को बिल्कुल नहीं मानते.
Keep in mind, these are educated people. They themselves didn't believe in reincarnation.
Right.
It wasn't like they jumped to that conclusion when he started making these statements. He's a chemistry professor, Mahavir, right?
Yeah.
So lying for that goes away.
Yep. No, I don't see that.
Then lying for fame is one of the arguments,
that
right?
That to me is all I could think of.
But what fame? They didn't want the fame. What are they getting out of the fame, right? And this is even if we say fame, right? How the birthmarks? How is there the forensic evidence to back all of this? Yeah. But fame still doesn't make sense. There are some psychological explanations. Kids have imaginary friends. You and I know this.
Right, but not like this.
Right. There are documented cases of kids creating rich narratives. So Antonia tried to, prod these possibilities. She looked at the archives of the newspaper that used to come at Mahavir's house to see if there was any time a reporting of Suresh's death back in 1983 that the family might have talked about it and this would have seeped into his head, right?
Sure.
There was one line of Suresh's murder back in 1983.
Yeah.
But one line that didn't talk about Uma or Monu and Tonu, nothing.
And this is not the time of internet where then this could have been prodded further or anything.
And there was only one person in Mahavir's circle in Bard village that knew of Suresh's family in Agra. But other than that, this family had no historical connection. There was no communication between them.
And with all of those theories, it's just that Suresh's family would really have to have some reason to then corroborate all of these things. Like they tried everything to poke holes in his theory. If it was just a cross-referencing by one person who also lived in that village, none of these holes would have actually stood the test in Titu's favor. So as much as I feel uneasy saying this, none of these theories you've brought up make any sense to me.
And these were the only prevailing theories. Conceit
there is nothing else I can
and
think
deceit.
Of. There is nothing else.
And Titu's family got nothing out of this. No money, no nothing. Maybe just another house for their baby boy. Antonia catalogued all these opposing theories in her research paper. She tried to steelman her findings by poking holes wherever possible, but there were simply no holes to be found. Conscious deceit and unconscious self-deception were the only alternate motives possible for lying about his rebirth. Unconscious self-deception refers to multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia. Antonia found Titu to not have these, nor did he have any incentive to deceive her. After spending weeks with Titu, Antonia concluded, Quote, like Stevenson, I conclude that while none of the cases I studied offer incontrovertible proof of reincarnation, they are part of the growing body of cases for which normal explanations do not seem to do justice to the data. The implications of these cases for understanding human psychology are sufficiently major to warrant further careful studies of such cases. We should beware of the tendency to discount the evidence these cases present because the concepts of paranormal phenomena are not a part of the Western scientific construction. Such cases offer evidence of the survival of some element of human personality after death. End quote. Chapter 9. Life After. Suresh Verma had been murdered by two men named Balbir Singh and Titu. You heard me right. In his afterlife, he got the same name as his murderer. Coverage of this case online has a lot of misreporting and false information. These details we have are confirmed by Dr. Toran Singh himself. Some online articles claim that as a kid, Titu got Suresh's murderers arrested, but that's false. Balbir and Titu were arrested right after murdering Suresh. They were in fact Suresh's business associates, involved in smuggling alongside him. Both of them were sentenced to prison, but were released merely 8 years after committing the crime. But that's not all. Dr. Toran Singh told us something he has never revealed publicly before, that he actually met his own murderers. That sentence is so weird in and of itself to say out loud. Sir, आप सुरेश के जो हत्यारे थे, मर्डर के बाद जेल गए, एक तो मुझे थोड़ा बताइए कि अगर आपको पता है, क्योंकि ऑनलाइन तो कहीं डिटेल मिलती नहीं, कि वो जेल इमीडिएटली चले गए दोनों या फिर
नहीं, उनको पुलिस ने पकड़ा, जो मेरे पास जानकारी है, जो मेरे को बताया गया, क्योंकि मैं तो था ही नहीं।
करेक्ट।
मेरे को जो बताया गया कि वो जेल गए अपनी सजा काट के, लेकिन उसके बाद उनसे मैं एक बार अपने घर पे मिला हूँ।
कब सर?
मैं लगभग 8-9 साल का रहा हूँ, तब मिला हूँ। कैसा
था सर वो
नहीं, मैं तो उन्हें देख के डर रहा था, छोटा भी था, मैं वहां से भाग गया।
आप पहचान गए थे या फिर आपको बताया हुआ था कि ये कौन आ रहे हैं?
मैं पहचान गया था बिल्कुल। वो आए दोनों मेरे घर पे जीप लेके, ठीक है।
आपको पता था वो आ रहे हैं?
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। मेरे को जो पुत्र उन्होंने पूछा कुछ के भाई कौन, वो यहीं रहते हैं या जो भी है, मेरे पापा का नाम पूछा है कुछ भी, तो मैं समझ गया कि ये वही है। मैं वहां से भाग निकला। फिर मैं अपने छोटे वाला भाई उसको बुलाने गया। मैंने कहा चल वो लोग आए हैं। कौन लोग आए कि जिन्होंने मेरे को पिछली बार मारा था।
और इस पॉइंट तक आपकी फैमिली मानती थी कि आप सुरेश रह चुके हैं, और वो आपकी स्टोरी जैसे पहले कहते थे बड़बड़ा रहा है टीटू, अब आपकी फैमिली तब तक हमारा टीटू सुरेश रह चुका है।
मेरे को लग रहा है कि 10-20 बार वो आगरा वाले भी आ चुके थे और हम लोग भी जा चुके थे उनके।
ठीक है।
हर मंगलवार को उनकी दुकान बंद रहती थी, तो मोस्टली मैं यहाँ जाना या वो आना
ठीक है
लगा रहता।
तो ये जो हत्यारे हैं बलबीर और जो भी अकॉम्प्लिस थे, ये आए आपके घर, आप भागे, फिर क्या बात हुई आपके
मैं चला गया, वहां से भाग गया, तो तब वापस आया अपने भाई के साथ, तो वो जा चुके थे तब।
अच्छा,
इतना ही बस।
उसके बाद कभी
कोई बात नहीं हुई।
आए क्यों थे वो? क्यूरियोसिटी थी?
आए या जो भी हुआ, जैसा भी।
I don't know if knowing of your past life, let alone one where you were murdered, is a curse or a blessing. Is it a burden to know you were a smuggler? Is it a burden to know your wife is alive but will never be your wife again? Titu's parents Mahavir and Shanti Devi worried this burden could cripple their kid. They didn't want him to go finding his past self only to forget who he is now. They ensured that after high school, he went as far away from Agra as possible. For a while, Titu tried to enlist in the army and even got into it in 2000s, but his parents didn't want him to be in this line. They wanted him to get an education. So they sent him to Ooty in Tamil Nadu to study science. There, he continued his father's legacy, learning yoga sciences and naturopathy. He spent 7 years there earning his PhD. Titu became Dr. Toran Singh, and to some degree, Suresh became a distant memory. Dr. Singh now presides as the Dean of Yoga and Naturopathy at the Patanjali University. He again has a wife, a son, and a new life. All his, a fresh chapter, a second edition. Dr. Toran Singh is now living the sequel, one where he seeks to make amends for his past transgressions. He talks about the karma of being a goon in his past life and how teaching kids is his service to society, his attempt at making up for his mistakes.
ईश्वरी कृपा है मेरे को कि मेरे को याद है अपने बारे में।
जी सर।
और मैं यही कहता हूँ इंसान से कि भाई ठीक ठाक कर्म करो, कोई भरोसा नहीं कोई कब लौट के आ जाए, कुछ भी जीवन का पता नहीं।
Thank you so much for having this conversation with us, sir. Thank you. After spending hours with Dr. Toran Singh and weeks researching his life, I'm not sure where I land on the topic of reincarnation. Every fiber of my rational brain begs me to find a natural explanation, yet the case for rebirth is hard to dismiss. Perhaps my stance is best summed up by something Dr. Ian Stevenson wrote towards his final years. This is how he ended the final research paper he ever published. Quote, "Let no one think that I know the answer. I am still seeking." End quote. Well, in this life or the next, stay safe, stay crazy, and stay desi.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.